during his State of the Nation address, the President Cyril Ramaphosa condemned the ongoing unrest as violence and looting of shops intensifying in mostly KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. Now, there have been suggestions that the unrest should be attributed to the term ethnic mobilization. Let's explore this further. And to do this, we're joined by Dr. Oscar Van Heerden, who is a scholar of international relations from the University of Fort Hare, but he joins us now in his personal capacity. Dr. Van Heerden, good to have you with us once again. Last night, when the President was addressing the nation, it was initially supposed to be an update on the COVID-19 as well as the state of disaster, but he could not go and already not finish his speech without addressing the current issues of the day. Let's listen back to what he had to say regarding the current turmoil that is being experienced in the country.
In the past few days, we have seen sporadic but increasingly violent protests in some parts of the country. Key infrastructure like national roads have been affected and blocked, slowing down the transportation of goods and services that keep our economy running. Property has been destroyed, cars have been stoned, people have been intimidated and threatened, and some have even been hurt. I even heard that some people may have died. These acts are endangering the lives of people and damaging our efforts to rebuild the economy. Our Constitution guarantees everyone's right to freely express themselves and to engage in peaceful protest. While there are those who may be hurt and angry at this moment, there can never be any justification whatsoever for anybody to embark on violent and destructive and disruptive actions that negatively affect the rights of others. It is a matter of concern to all South Africans that some of these acts of violence are based on ethnic mobilization. This must be condemned by all South Africans at all costs, as we are a nation committed to non-racialism and non-tribalism.
Dr. Van Heerden, that's just a part of what the President said last night. What do you make of his statement that part of what we're seeing now is based on what the President terms ethnic mobilization?
Thanks, Tommy. You know, I think the President is referring to a phenomenon that has been creeping into the ANC over the years. I mean, this whole ethnic phenomenon started way back in 2007 when then President Zuma made a run for president of the ANC. People might recall at that conference that was held in Polokwane in Limpopo province, already there was the display of T-shirts and regalia that spoke of 100% Zulu. We saw, for example, the various stakeholders that gathered outside and inside in Kandla, a lot of them also traditional Zulu authorities that were lending support to the president in the run-up to his arrest. And of course, there's also been over the years a huge influx of IFP members into the ANC, especially at a time when the IFP was not considered to be a political home for them anymore. So that, and also the epicenter of this conflict being in KZN, I think is all, and of course the brandishing of Zulu traditional weapons and so on. All of these factors is, I think, what informed the president and his advisors to suggest that there is perhaps a narrow ethnic component to the violence that we are seeing now.
Is that accurate, though, considering for the fact that, as former President Jacob Zuma himself said, that he himself is Ibutu. He is a Zulu man. This happened in KwaZulu-Natal. Amabutu, who are, quote-unquote, his people, he's part of them, would be coming out and supporting him. Is it then accurate to actually call this an issue of ethnic mobilization? And considering that we are actually seeing unrest and protests as well as looting taking place in places outside of KwaZulu-Natal?
No, absolutely. I think it's one element that cannot be ignored. Zulu nationalism, as we all know, has always been a phenomenon that it flares up when it comes to tension and conflict. We saw it in the 90s with the run-up to our first democratic elections, the continuous political killings and so forth that still sporadically come up in the province, particularly prevalent in KwaZulu-Natal. And so I don't think it's an element that can be ignored. Yes, it is true that, of course, former President Zuma is a Zulu man. He lives in KwaZulu-Natal, etc. But I think history shows that there is a potential for narrow Zulu nationalism to take shape in this particular instance. Now, I agree with you that that is perhaps where it started, within the province of KwaZulu-Natal, from that sort of perspective. Now, what we have seen coming up in Gauteng and other places is pure criminality. These are opportunists that have seen a gap and is now wanting to jump on the bandwagon, supposedly part of the Release Zuma campaign, but actually what we are seeing is looting and blatant criminality. So I don't think there's any ethnicity or ethnic component to what we are seeing outside of KwaZulu-Natal.
The concern of Zulu nationalism and, infighting within the various nationalities is something that was pointed out by Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi as an issue of concern. But what do you believe is the impact and the effect of highlighting this particular narrative?
I think the reason why the president, chose to highlight this is precisely because we've seen the ills of tribalism throughout Africa, especially post-colonial. Once the colonial masters left, the flare-up and the tension that was there between tribes, whether we are in Sudan, in the north and the south, whether we are in Mali, in Rwanda with the Hutsis and the Tutsis, etc., there are numerous volumes of experiences throughout the continent that says that tribalism in its crudest form is indeed a very serious problem. And I think that's why the ANC, in its 109-year history, have always been anti-tribalism. They've seen during their exile years on the continent what bad instances can take place because of tribalism, and so they've really crafted a very serious and strategic campaign to put emphasis on non-racialism, precisely because they know if not brought under control, if not highlighted, if we are not aware of its rearing its ugly head, and hence mentioning it front and center, there is the potential that it can spiral out of control.
So you're saying it was mentioned in order for it to be curtailed and controlled. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And to make people aware in KwaZulu-Natal, the majority for that matter, in KwaZulu-Natal, and that's, I think, the aim of the president's input, is to appeal to them to say, we know that you are not narrow nationalists, that you are not narrow ethnicists, and therefore people must not be allowed to actually try and put this as front and center.
And what is the adequate political solution to the current situation?
Well, it's about enforcing the law. It's as simple as that. There is no other political solution or any of that, because I'm sure you will agree, Tami, if for whatever reason a silly decision should be made to actually somehow meet the demands of these elements and even consider to release or pardon, etc., President Zuma, I think it would set a significantly bad precedent, because all that will happen is that the same forces and criminality will then say that Esma Gashule must not be prosecuted, and this one must be released, and Cyril must go to jail, etc., etc. So there is only one outcome here, and that is for law enforcement agencies to bring this matter under control and to prosecute, arrest and prosecute those that are responsible for fueling this violence.
We have seen, before I let you go, Dr. Van Heerden, the deployment of the SANDF. They've just released a statement that they will be making their presence felt in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Your thoughts on this?
I think it's a very bad idea. I've always opposed the SANDF getting involved in domestic policing and law enforcement. I seriously don't understand why the South African Police Service cannot manage this particular issue. These are small, sporadic instances in only 3 or 4 localities in the country. The police services in the olden days were very competent to deal with this kind of public disorder. I think what this says is that the public disorder police component of SAPS needs to be beefed up. Perhaps it speaks to the tranquility of our new democracy and the fact that there isn't a need for a huge budget for that kind of policing. But I think calling in the SANDF at every turn because there's a skirmish here or there is a very bad precedent. I think the National Defence Force should protect the sovereignty of the entire state from enemies outside of the country and not from those that are causing chaos inside the country. But now that they have been brought in, let's hope. You know, the thing, Tommy, is that the SANDF is not a law enforcement component of our government. They are trained to kill, and that's what they know. They are not trained to shoot warning shots and tear gas and exert crowd control and so on. So we've seen at the level 5 lockdown how bad it got because we involved the National Defence Force. So I think it's a bad decision. I think the police should rather have been mobilized from other provinces to beef up the police services in the affected areas. I just don't think it makes sense.
Dr. Oscar Van Heerden, thank you for your insight and your input this afternoon. That's Dr. Oscar Van Heerden, who's a scholar of international relations, also at the University of Fort Hare. Thank you for your insight today.